It was supposed to be a normal family evening, three generations under one roof, sharing a meal and conversation. But by the next morning, nothing would ever be the same. In November 2022, a family gathering in a quiet Florida home turned into a nightmare no one could escape. A 19-year-old college student, Luke Ingram, arrived at his father's home. To the outside world, he was just a young man visiting family. But inside those walls, a storm was brewing. Luke's father, Clint, thought he was doing the right thing, bringing his son closer after troubling signs had begun to surface. But there were things even a parent's love couldn't prepare for. That night, locked doors and uneasy glances told a story of fear, the kind of fear you can't explain but feel deep in your chest. It started as a quiet dinner, with three generations gathered around the table. But Luke's behavior was unsettling. He said little, his piercing stare fixed on his father and grandfather. Clint knew something was wrong. He felt it. Before heading to bed that night, he locked his door, an act so ordinary yet so telling, a decision that would make all the difference by morning. What unfolded in the dead of night can only be described as chilling. Muffled sounds, distant cries for help, and then silence. A silence so heavy it seeped into every corner of the home. When Clint finally unlocked his door, what he found would haunt him forever. This is the story of Luke Ingram, a teenager battling inner demons that no one could see coming, a family torn apart, a community shaken, and questions that remain unanswered. What drove him to commit such a heinous act? And could anyone have stopped it? Stay with us as we unravel the harrowing details of a night that changed everything. In the early hours of November 9th, 2022, a 911 call shattered the silence of a Palm Coast neighborhood in Flagler County, Florida. A father, bloodied and trembling, banged on a neighbor's door, his voice shaking as he pleaded for help. Inside his home just a few feet away, his 85-year-old father, Darwin Ingram, lay lifeless, his body covered in blood. The alleged assailant? His own son, 19-year-old Luke Ingram, a college student battling schizophrenia. Luke had arrived in Palm Coast just days before, brought there by his father, Clint Ingram, who hoped that proximity and care might help manage Luke's increasingly erratic behavior. Luke had been struggling with schizophrenia, a condition that had taken hold in recent years, altering his demeanor and creating rifts in their once close-knit family. Clint believed he was doing the right thing, a father stepping in to protect and support his son during his most vulnerable moments. But no one could have foreseen how this act of love would lead to unimaginable tragedy. The evening of November 8th was meant to be ordinary. Three generations of the Ingram family sat down for dinner, sharing what seemed like a calm moment together. Yet throughout the meal, Luke's behavior unsettled his father. He was silent, his gaze locked on Clint and Darwin in an almost unblinking stare. Tension hung in the air, heavy and inexplicable. Clint felt a growing unease, so much so that he took an unusual step that night. He locked his bedroom door before going to bed. Hours later, Clint was jolted awake by terrifying sounds echoing through the house. Low growls and muffled screams pierced the night, sending him rushing out of his room. What he saw next would haunt him forever. His father, Darwin, was sprawled on the living room floor, unresponsive and soaked in blood. Near him stood Luke, calm, almost detached, with a blunt object in his hand, one that authorities would later identify as the murder weapon. Panicking, Clint reached for his phone to call 911. But before he could complete the call, Luke lunged at him, putting him in a chokehold. Twice, Luke overpowered him, his strength seemingly fueled by something far beyond comprehension. Clint, desperate to save his life, managed to escape, stumbling into the night and pounding on neighbors' doors for help. One neighbor, shaken but alert, called the authorities. When deputies arrived, they found Luke standing over his grandfather's lifeless body, his face void of emotion. Despite their commands, Luke resisted, forcing them to deploy a taser to subdue him. He was taken into custody and charged with a litany of crimes, including second-degree murder and domestic violence battery. As the investigation progressed, the charges grew even more horrific. Evidence suggested that Luke had sexually assaulted his grandfather during the attack, leading to additional charges of first-degree murder and sexual battery with a deadly weapon. The case sent shockwaves through the quiet community. Neighbors, friends, and even law enforcement struggled to comprehend how a promising young man like Luke, a college student from Dunwoody, Georgia, could commit such an act of unimaginable violence. As investigators dug deeper, Luke's untreated mental health challenges came into focus, raising questions about the intersection of mental illness and violent behavior. This tragic story is not just about a family torn apart, but about a system that failed to catch a young man's spiral before it was too late. Stay with us as we uncover the details of this haunting case, exploring the events that led to this horrific night and the lingering questions about what could have been done to prevent it. The Ingram family was well regarded in their community, known for their close-knit bonds and active involvement in local affairs. Darwin Ingram, the family patriarch, was a retired federal civil servant who had settled into a peaceful life in Palm Coast, Florida. His son, Clint Ingram, 48, was a dedicated father striving to support his own son, Luke Ingram. Luke, a 19-year-old college student from Dunwoody, Georgia, had shown academic promise and was pursuing higher education. However, during his teenage years, Luke began exhibiting signs of mental health struggles, which became more pronounced over time. As Luke transitioned into college life, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. Family members noticed troubling changes. He became withdrawn, exhibited unusual staring episodes, and engaged in conversations that lacked coherence. Concerned for his well-being, Clint persuaded Luke to leave college temporarily and come to Palm Coast, hoping that a change of environment and proximity to family might help stabilize him. Clint's decision was driven by a father's love and the hope that he could provide the support Luke needed during this challenging time. Despite these efforts, Luke's condition deteriorated. This tragic incident highlighted the challenges faced by families dealing with mental illness and underscored the importance of timely intervention and support. The Ingram family's ordeal serves as a somber reminder of the complexities surrounding mental health issues and the devastating impact they can have when left unaddressed. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the events leading up to that fateful night, exploring the signs that were missed and the steps that could have been taken to prevent such a tragedy. In the early hours of November 9th, 2022, the tranquility of Claremont Court in Palm Coast, Florida, was shattered by a series of harrowing events that would leave an indelible mark on the community. The Ingram family home, once a sanctuary, became the epicenter of a tragic incident that unfolded with alarming rapidity. The day began unassumingly. Luke Ingram, a 19-year-old college student from Dunwoody, Georgia, had recently arrived in Palm Coast at the behest of his father, Clint Ingram. Concerned by his son's erratic behavior, Clint hoped that bringing Luke closer to family might provide the support he needed. That evening, the household comprised three generations: 85-year-old Darwin Ingram, his son Clint, and grandson Luke. They shared a meal, but an unsettling tension permeated the atmosphere. Luke's silence and unwavering stare during dinner did not go unnoticed, prompting Clint to lock his bedroom door before retiring for the night. As the night deepened, the household descended into chaos. Clint was abruptly awakened by disturbing sounds, growls and screams, emanating from within the house. Rushing to the living room, he was confronted with a horrifying scene. His father, Darwin, lay unresponsive, covered in blood. Nearby, Luke exhibited a calm demeanor that starkly contrasted with the violence that had transpired. When Clint attempted to call 911, Luke attacked him, placing him in a chokehold. Clint managed to escape and sought help from neighbors, who alerted the authorities. Upon arrival, Luke was uncooperative, leading deputies to use a taser to subdue him. He was charged with second-degree murder, domestic violence battery by strangulation, resisting arrest with and without violence, and aggravated battery on a law enforcement officer. Later, a grand jury indicted him on charges of first-degree murder and sexual battery with a deadly weapon, as evidence suggested he had sexually assaulted his grandfather during the attack. The crime scene was a testament to the brutality of the attack. Investigators meticulously documented the evidence, noting the signs of a violent struggle. The community, reeling from the shock, grappled with the reality that such a heinous act could occur in their midst. Neighbors expressed disbelief, recalling the Ingrams as a respectable family with no prior indications of such turmoil. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that Luke's untreated mental health challenges played a critical role in this tragic event. The community grappled with the horror of the crime, while questions about the adequacy of mental health support systems came to the forefront. In the aftermath of the harrowing events at the Ingram residence, law enforcement faced the daunting task of unraveling the sequence of actions that led to the tragic death of 85-year-old Darwin Ingram and the assault on his son, Clint Ingram. Detectives meticulously reconstructed the timeline, relying on physical evidence, witness testimonies, and Luke Ingram's own statements to piece together the night's grim narrative. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to Luke's mental state. Medical records and family testimonies revealed a history of schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder characterized by distorted thinking and perceptions. Clint Ingram disclosed that his son had been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, prompting him to bring Luke from Georgia to Florida in hopes of providing better support. Despite these efforts, it became evident that Luke's condition had been deteriorating, raising questions about the adequacy of his treatment and whether he had been adhering to prescribed medications. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and emotionally charged. A grand jury indicted him on counts of first-degree murder and sexual battery with a deadly weapon, both carrying severe penalties. In court, the defense centered around Luke's mental health, arguing that his actions were a direct result of untreated schizophrenia, rendering him incapable of distinguishing right from wrong at the time of the crime. This plea of not guilty by reason of insanity was supported by psychiatric evaluations and expert testimonies, painting a picture of a young man in the throes of a severe psychotic episode. The community watched in anguish as the case unfolded, grappling with the dual tragedies of a brutal crime and the systemic failures that may have contributed to it. Family members expressed profound grief and frustration, questioning whether more could have been done to prevent the escalation of Luke's mental health issues. Public reaction was mixed, with some advocating for compassion given Luke's condition, while others called for accountability and justice for the heinous acts committed. Ultimately, the court found Luke Ingram not guilty by reason of insanity, acknowledging that his mental illness played a pivotal role in the events. He was committed to a state mental health facility for treatment, with the possibility of release contingent upon evaluations of his mental state and the threat he may pose to society. This verdict underscored the complexities of adjudicating cases involving severe mental illness, highlighting the delicate balance between ensuring public safety and addressing the needs of individuals with profound psychological disorders. We'll explore the aftermath of this case, examining its broader implications for mental health awareness and the legal system's approach to handling such complex and deeply emotional situations. In the quiet courtroom of Flagler County, Florida, the case of Luke Ingram reached its pivotal moment. The 19-year-old, charged with the brutal murder of his grandfather, Darwin Ingram, and the assault of his father, Clint Ingram, stood before Circuit Judge Terrence Perkins. The weight of the crimes was undeniable, but the question loomed. What was Luke's mental state at the time of the offenses? Medical evaluations had diagnosed Luke with schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder that distorts reality. Evidence presented in court detailed his deteriorating condition, marked by hallucinations and delusions. Family testimonies revealed their desperate attempts to seek help, recounting episodes where Luke's behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. Despite these efforts, the system's inadequacies left Luke's condition largely untreated. After careful deliberation, Judge Perkins rendered a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. He concluded that Luke was legally insane at the time of the attacks, incapable of distinguishing right from wrong due to his mental illness. This verdict meant that instead of prison, Luke would be committed to a secure mental health facility for treatment, with his release contingent upon significant improvement in judicial approval. The community of Flagler County grappled with the outcome. Neighbors who once knew the Ingram family as peaceful and loving were left in shock, struggling to reconcile the heinous acts with the young man they thought they knew. Local leaders and residents engaged in deep discussions about mental health awareness, recognizing the urgent need for systemic reforms to prevent such tragedies in the future. Mental health advocates seized the moment to highlight the critical gaps in the healthcare system. They emphasized the importance of early intervention, accessible treatment options, and continuous support for individuals suffering from severe mental illnesses. The case underscored the dire consequences of neglecting mental health, prompting calls for increased funding, education, and community resources. For the Ingram family, the resolution brought a complex mix of relief and sorrow. While there was solace in understanding that Luke's actions were driven by a debilitating illness, the loss of Darwin and the trauma endured by Clint were immeasurable. The family faced the arduous journey of healing, haunted by questions of what might have been if adequate mental health support had been available. As the legal proceedings concluded, the broader society was left to reflect on the intersection of mental illness in the criminal justice system. Luke Ingram's case became a poignant example of the complexities involved when addressing crimes committed under the influence of severe mental disorders. It served as a clarion call to prioritize mental health, not only to prevent future tragedies, but to foster a more compassionate and understanding community. The story of Luke Ingram is not just a tale of tragedy, it's a chilling reflection of the cracks in our mental health system. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder that distorts perception and impairs judgment, Luke's untreated condition became the catalyst for an unthinkable act. The devastating loss of his grandfather, Darwin Ingram, and the trauma endured by his father, Clint, underscore how mental health struggles, when left unaddressed, can escalate into unimaginable consequences. Luke's case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The gap between identifying a mental illness and securing effective treatment is often far too wide. For the Ingram family, their love and concern for Luke were not enough to navigate a system riddled with barriers. Despite their efforts to provide care, they found themselves powerless as his condition worsened. The family faced logistical, systemic, and societal challenges that many others in similar situations experience. This failure of intervention wasn't unique to Luke. It's a recurring issue that echoes in countless stories of untreated mental illness. But could this tragedy have been avoided? That is the question that lingers, haunting everyone who has followed this case. If Luke had received consistent care, if there had been greater access to mental health resources, or if intervention had occurred earlier, would Darwin still be alive? Would Clint have been spared the trauma of surviving such a horrific ordeal? These questions demand answers, not just for the Ingrams, but for all families who struggle in silence. The legal resolution of the case also invites heated debate. The judge's decision to find Luke not guilty by reason of insanity was a turning point. While it ensured that Luke would receive treatment rather than punitive incarceration, it also left the community with mixed emotions. Some saw the ruling as compassionate and necessary, a recognition of the role his illness played. Others struggled with the idea that justice for Darwin's death felt incomplete. The complexity of this case blurs the line between justice and understanding, forcing society to grapple with how it approaches mental illness within the framework of the law. The impact of the case extends far beyond the courtroom. In Flagler County, the Ingrams were known as a peaceful, well-respected family. The tragedy shattered that perception and left neighbors reeling, questioning how such violence could erupt within a home they believed to be safe. For mental health advocates and local leaders, the case became a rallying cry to address the glaring inadequacies in the system. It spurred conversations about the importance of early intervention, funding for mental health services, and community education on recognizing and supporting individuals with severe mental disorders. For Clint Ingram, the loss of his father and the reality of his son's condition is a burden that cannot be measured. His family, once whole, has been irreparably changed. The journey toward healing will be long, fraught with sorrow and unanswered questions. But their story serves as a sobering reminder that no family, no matter how strong, is immune to the challenges of mental illness. As we close this chapter, we're left with one undeniable truth. Addressing mental health is not just about treating symptoms, it's about preventing crises. This tragedy shows us how high the stakes are when the system fails. It's a call to action for policymakers, healthcare providers, and communities to prioritize mental health, ensuring that no one falls through the cracks. What are your thoughts on this heartbreaking case? Could earlier intervention have saved Darwin Ingram's life? Could it have prevented Luke from descending into such a dark place? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel if you believe the judge's decision was the right one. We'll be releasing multiple true crime stories every week, cases just as thought-provoking, just as impactful as this one. Don't miss an update. Together, let's explore these stories, not just for their tragedies, but for the lessons they leave behind.